Iran strikes back at the U.S., firing more than a dozen ballistic missiles at two Iraqi military bases housing U.S. troops. Tehran calling the attacks retaliation for Washington's killing of its top military commander last week. Our correspondent reports from Tehran. Hi, and thanks for joining us here in the France 24 newsroom. I'm Claire Rush. Glad to have you with us. We start with this breaking news. The Pentagon says Iran has fired more than a dozen ballistic missiles at two Iraqi military bases housing U.S. troops, one in Erbil and the Ain al-Assad air base in the west of the country. There are also reports from Iranian media of a second round of attacks against U.S. bases in Iraq. This as Iran strikes back at the U.S. for killing its top military commander, Qasem Soleimani, in a drone strike in Baghdad on Friday. The White House says President Trump is monitoring the situation closely. So far, there are no reports of damage or casualties. Our correspondent in Washington, Ketivan Gorjestani, has been following these breaking developments. Here's her report.
Well, as you mentioned, the Pentagon confirmed that dozens of ballistic missiles, initially we were talking about rockets, but now they're talking about ballistic missiles fired from Iran, which means that Iran directly hit at U.S. interests. And that's exactly what the Iranian authorities have threatened to do, to take direct military action against U.S. military interests. And that's what they've done with these strikes on two U.S. targets, including that al-Assad air base. Now, the Revolutionary Guards claimed responsibility very quickly, talking about a successful attack and warning that this was just the beginning. The fierce revenge has just begun. They also threatened more attacks in case of renewed U.S. aggression towards Iranian assets or Iran itself. So far, we don't have any information on any damage or casualties on those two targets. The Pentagon saying that it was currently assessing the battle damage, and but they were initial reports that there might not be any casualty. This has yet to be confirmed, though. The question now really is how the U.S. is going to reply to this strike by the Iranians. The Secretary of State as well as the Secretary of Defense were at the White House discussing the matter with the president. There is word that Donald Trump will be making some sort of a statement at some point during the evening. We don't know yet if it will be a full-on address to the nation, but there will likely be some sort of a statement to react to what it is the biggest escalation in those tensions between the U.S. and Iran, with a direct hit from the Iranians on U.S. interests.
The Iraqi parliament passed a non-binding resolution this weekend calling on U.S. troops to withdraw. Could this escalation change that?
Well, the Iraqis are really between a rock and a hard place right now, because the U.S. are their long-term allies, and they've been fighting alongside the Americans. They have been sharing those air bases, and it's been like this for years. On the other hand, Iran is really the big and strong neighbor, and the Iraqis have to deal with the Iranians because they are the regional power, and there are those factions within the Iraqi government and the Iraqi parliament that are pro-Iranian and that are backed by Iran. This situation is very difficult to determine which way it will go, because it could go either way. Right now, the Iraqis, after that vote in parliament, were eager to get all of the foreign troops out, but of course this was directed at the Americans. Then there was that letter that sparked some confusion, a letter from the United States seemingly acknowledging this future withdrawal of U.S. Troops before the Pentagon and the State Department backtracked, saying that this was really just a mistake. It was a draft that was released by mistake, and that the U.S. was going nowhere and was staying in Iraq. The Iraqi government very confused as to what the message there was, because the Iraqi government said that this letter went through the official channels, was sent very properly, and that they did not understand where the U.S. stood. The question now is what will happen with a new Iraqi government, because remember that the prime minister is currently the acting prime minister, and that he will likely not be making the final decision to ask those U.S. troops to leave. And the situation right now, the escalation between Iran and the U.S. Will make that decision very, very hard.
Now, amidst this severe escalation between the U.S. and Tehran playing out on Iraqi soil, Iraq's prime minister has again called on U.S. troops to fully withdraw from the country. His call follows a non-binding resolution passed by Iraqi parliament on Sunday, calling on foreign forces to leave. But the U.S. says it's staying put. Canada and Germany, on the other hand, have announced plans to temporarily withdraw their troops to neighboring countries. Andrew Hillier has more.
Confusion over whether the U.S. will or won't withdraw its troops from Iraq.
On Monday, we received a letter from a US commander about the troop withdrawal. Then, 4 or 5 hours later, we were told that the letter was wrong. The letter clearly indicated a withdrawal from Iraq.
A stance denied by US President Donald Trump and his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who insist the troops aren't going anywhere.
Well, I don't know anything about that letter. The letter was sent, and I understand it was an unsigned letter. So I could maybe let Mike speak to it. I don't know if that letter was a hoax or was it unsigned.
The letter itself was a mistake. I think
what?
the Department of Defense has spoken that it was a mistake. It wasn't intended.
5,200 US soldiers are currently stationed in Iraq, most as part of the international coalition against the Islamic State group. France likewise has said that its roughly 200 troops won't be pulling out. Canada, on the other hand, says that a part of its contingent of 500 troops will be temporarily moved to Kuwait, while Germany has already withdrawn 32 out of 120 soldiers to Jordan. The UK, meanwhile, says that it will remain in Iraq unless the Iraqi government specifically asks it to leave.
We will be speaking, and we are continually trying to get them to say it is in your best interest for us to remain, but we will respect Iraqi sovereignty. If they require us to leave, that is their right, and we will respect it.
As for NATO, the alliance says it has temporarily suspended its training mission in the country.
Iran's strikes on 2 Iraqi military bases housing U.S. troops came just hours after a stampede broke out at the funeral of Iran's top military commander Qasem Soleimani. At least 56 people were killed in the stampede and hundreds more injured, according to local media. The stampede occurred in Soleimani's hometown of Kerman as thousands of people packed the streets to see his coffin before the burial, which has now been postponed. As massive crowds mourned Soleimani, there were more calls for revenge against the U.S., which killed him in a drone strike in neighboring Iraq on Friday. Mario Sofos has more.
Huge crowds packed the central square to honour the Iranian general killed on Friday in a US airstrike. The surrounding streets were also rammed with mourners, despairing at the loss of a national hero who once led the Revolutionary Guard's Expeditionary Quds Force. The head of Iran's Revolutionary Guard promised retaliation. Recent days have seen various funeral processions throughout the country, notably here in Tehran, where Ayatollah Khomeini was visibly moved. Soleimani's remains were also taken to Iran's holy city of Qom, turning out another massive crowd. As Soleimani's body was finally laid to rest on Tuesday, the tension between Iran and the United States was not.
It's a highly anticipated press conference. Former Nissan boss Carlos Ghosn is set to speak to journalists on Wednesday for the first time since he was arrested in Japan in November 2018. It comes as the world's attention is riveted on the family's home in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, where Ghosn arrived a few days ago after spectacularly escaping justice in Japan. Our special correspondents spoke to Beirut residents, divided over the treatment inflicted on the former giant of the car industry.
This house behind me is Carlos Ghosn's official home here in Beirut, Lebanon. It was purchased by a Nissan subsidiary for a little more than $8.5 million. Now, earlier on today, we met the man who renovated it before it was sold, and who was also present when Carol Ghosn visited it for the first time.
Mrs. Ghosn spotted the house, and then Mr. Ghosn visited it as well. They fell in love with it and decided to buy it. They renovated it as if it were their house, but actually it isn't. Carlos Ghosn turned this house into a gem. He turns everything he touches into gold. He's done it for Michelin, for Renault, for Nissan and for Mitsubishi.
Not everyone in Lebanon is convinced that Carlos Ghosn is innocent. We went to meet those who have been on the streets for weeks now, asking for an end to corruption.
Carlos Ghosn used mafia-like methods to flee Japan and enter Lebanon. I consider his presence here an insult to the Lebanese state. I think he should be handed to the Japanese authorities and face trial over there.
Our revolution is against corruption. We want all those who stole to be taken to court. If he has committed crimes, he must face trial and be rejected by everyone. On the other hand, if he has done nothing, if he is innocent, he is most welcome.
Carlos Ghosn will be giving a press conference this Wednesday at 3 p.m. He is expected to speak at length and to present proof that he is not guilty.
Now, we'll be having a special edition on Carlos Ghosn and the implications of his remarkable escape story this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Paris time. So do tune in to France 24 for more analysis and reporting on that story, again this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Paris time. Now we're going to go back to our top headline at this hour, Iran's strikes on Iraqi military bases housing U.S. troops. For more on this, we cross live to our correspondent in Tehran, Catalina Gomez. Catalina, what are the latest media reports they're saying?
What the last thing we know is that the Tasnim News, that is a news agency related with the Revolutionary Guard, they say that these tens of missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, were launched from Kermanshah. It's a city or area of Iran in the west of Iran, very close to the Iraqi border. We also know that another media in Iran are saying that all the bases, subterranean, underground bases, are ready to respond if there is any other attack from the United States back in Iran. There is a statement at the beginning of the attacks, after the attacks from this organization, the Revolutionary Guards, that they ask the Americans don't respond in order not to initiate and escalate in the region, but they also alert the bases, the countries, the allies of United States in the region where the bases, American bases are, not to let Americans to respond from these bases in order not to have retaliation. And the same happens for Israel.
Yes, can you tell us more about these reports that the Revolutionary Guards is considering Israel a U.S. ally in the killing of Soleimani?
Yeah, according to this statement of the Revolutionary Guards, they are making it equivalent that Zionists as related to the, as they say, Zionists related to the Americans. This is not news. From a long time ago, Iran has been saying that whatever it does, the government of Israel is the same as the government of America. They related very closely. But there is another media, local media, talking about that if United States really attacks back in Iran, then in that moment Hezbollah could be the one who respond and attack Israel. But as I say, this is just local media who are saying that it's not a part of the statement of Revolutionary Guards, and we don't know how much speculation is in all this information.
Yes, now, as you previously said, the Revolutionary Guards are also warning U.S. allies in the region that they could be attacked if their countries are used as a base for U.S. retaliation against Tehran. That's really widening the threats here, isn't it? It's not just Washington that could be involved in this conflict.
Yeah, and it's also not news. Iran has been telling, especially these countries where the Americans are based, that please don't let them to stay. Actually, the reality is that in the last weeks, actually, they have been trying to create some bridge in order to improve the relations in the region, especially in the countries in the other side of the Persian Gulf. We know that when General Qasem Soleimani arrived in Baghdad, he was going to deliver a message from Iran to the Prime Minister in Iraq, Abdul Ahmed Mahdi, in a response to Saudi Arabia in order to improve their relations. Then, this is not new. Iran has always been saying to these countries who base American bases in their countries, don't do that. But the interesting point is what's going to happen to Qatar. We have the foreign ministry of this country, of Qatar, in Iran, days ago, trying to talk with the foreign minister of Iran, Mohammad Javad Zarif, in order to try to improve these relations, because I think the fear is coming from countries like this.
All right, thank you so much for that update, Catalina Gomez, our correspondent, reporting live from Tehran. That's all from us here in the studio for now, but do stay tuned to France 24. There's more news and analysis coming up next.